Welcome to the Be Better podcast, presented by CSO Broker, the show where we will speak to innovators in sustainability, so through collaboration, we can build a better world. Solutions today for a better tomorrow. Welcome back, listener. I'm your host, Bobby Climate, and on this episode of Be Better, we have a fascinating conversation lined up with Annalee Bloomfield, the CEO and co-founder of Sustain.Life, one of the most exciting product-led carbon accounting and ESG data management solutions on the market today. And I can say that with confidence because, in full transparency, I work for Annalee at Sustain.Life, but it's not every day that we really get a chance to sit down and speak about how she approaches her work. Annalee's journey in the climate tech space might seem non-linear, but as we find with both founders, a deep passion for sustainability is in her DNA. From founding her first company at 24 in the financial services space to linking up with the founding team at Jet.com, who sold to Walmart, Annalee is now answering her calling and tackling one of the most critical issues of our time, climate change. In this episode, we'll explore Annalee's path, driven by a deep-rooted passion for environmental issues instilled in her from a very young age. Annalee shares her insights on the importance of having a strong, cohesive team, the evolving regulatory landscape, and the mission to democratize sustainability for everybody. Here's our conversation. Annalee, thank you so much for joining the Be Better podcast today. I really appreciate it.
No, thanks for having me, Bobby. It's great to join you here.
Of course. I'm so curious, when I look at your background, relatively non-linear path, you could say, seeing as you're in the climate tech space and carbon accounting, ESG data management. And I'm so curious, when I look at your background, starting in kind of the financial services space and then moving into e-commerce and retail, why climate? Why is that the problem that you really wanted to kind of focus your energy towards solving?
Yeah. So there's a couple reasons. I think the sort of primary one that I think provides some helpful context is that I grew up with climate as being kind of a really big part of my kind of childhood. My dad is a statistics professor. He was an author on the first two IPCC reports in the 90s, and his work was all about tying anthropogenic emissions to global warming, so showing that people cause climate change. And we had, just a lot of conversations growing up about what that meant. And I think it gave me a really clear sense that people and businesses have a role to play, and that we have been a really integral part of bringing the climate to where it is today and where it's going, and that there's a lot of room for us to do more and to do better, particularly if we have tools to help us do that. So I think it was a huge part of growing up. For a long time, I felt like my skill set didn't necessarily lend itself towards working in climate. I didn't feel like I was going to develop a new battery or make real inroads in solar. And so I think it took some time for me to find a way where it felt like, I could really contribute something in the climate space. And I'll say, after Jet.com was acquired by Walmart, which my co-founders and I from Sustain met each other at Jet.com, and then stayed together at Walmart. And in that time, we were really thinking about, okay, what do we want to do next? We want to build something together. Where do we have skill sets or experiences that let us do something that's unique, or that we would be like uniquely good at doing? And we felt like obviously software was the place for us. That's what we're all good at building. And I think all were increasingly feeling that climate was kind of the most important, problem of our time. And so even leaving aside like our sort of like personal interest in climate, we sort of took a step back and said, okay, we've had a successful exit, or in some cases, several successful exits. We've got a really fantastic team and this incredible asset, which is people that we can keep together. What's the most important thing that we could do with those people. And so,
Right.
we thought about business ideas in all kinds of different realms, right? But we sort of kept coming back to climate and saying, if this is the most important problem of our time, and also we think there's going to be a commercial market here, and we have all these assets, both in our own experience and capital and human capital, um, we just sort of kept coming back to these climate ideas and saying we can't, walk away from this. It's the most important thing we can be doing. And I do think part of that also is connected to Mike and Patrick, my two co-founders, both have kids. I was just getting pregnant when we started this business, and so I think for all of us, this question of legacy and what are we leaving for our kids, what are we doing to make the world better, was just becoming increasingly important to all of us too.
Yeah. I guess when you think about the success that Sustain.Life has experienced, how much can kind of assign that success to working with co-founders of yours who you have worked with in the past? I would imagine there was um, a time where you joined up with an organization or founded an organization where you really didn't know, kind of the core competencies and, communication styles of, your other founders. I'm curious.
Yeah, so I co-founded my first startup at 24 with people I did not know well at all.
Yeah.
And as you can imagine, it was a completely different experience.
Right.
And then obviously joining Jet, which was a, awesome and fast-paced experience for sure. But also like I joined I was one of the first, I don't know, 50 employees, but was not there on day one. So I think starting something from the beginning with people that you do know incredibly well, um, it just lets you do so much more so quickly. And so when I think
Yeah.
about how much we've built and how quickly we've been able to do it, I don't think you can do that without people that you know well and know how to work with and like know how to team with. And so that's obviously, myself, my co-founders, but also, about 35% of our total team work together at Jet, Walmart, and now Sustain.Life. So kind of 8 to 10 years of operating experience, which is mostly on the product and engineering side, which I think has enabled us to move really quickly in developing software and kind of have shared expectations about how we want that sort of software development process to go, which obviously, you know, enables us to move a lot faster. And I think the last kind of point I would make on that is like with my initial, co-founders when I was like 24, every major disagreement was a moment of like, oh my gosh, is this partnership going to work? Like, is this business going to
Right.
work? Are we all on the same page? And when you're
Yeah.
building a business with people you've worked with for 10 years already, like there's no disagreement that's like a partnership ending disagreement, right? Like it just becomes
Yeah.
very easy to have, I mean, easy to have hard conversations sounds a little silly, but the risks around hard conversations are much lower when you have that much shared history.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. And, I think and I'm not sure if you realize this getting into, the carbon accounting and ESG data management space, but, when I got into it a couple of years ago, there was every software company around was kind of hanging an ESG shingle on their house and, trying to spin up a module here or, go out and purchase a company there. I'm really curious from your perspective on, kind of where Sustain.Life kind of fits into like the climate tech ecosystem and how you've been able to kind of differentiate yourself from other competitors.
Yeah, I think you're right. There was a really interesting period where everyone was sort of trying to get into this space, uh, you know, aggressively, and I think we were probably as naive as many of the folks in that rush where I think if you're someone who's relatively quantitative, who understands software, you start to say, hey, this is an accounting problem. This is like pretty straightforward. We can create
Right.
software that does this. This is great. And I think what we and many of those competitors learned is that it's actually incredibly complicated and way more complicated than we gave it credit for, and less developed than something like like financial accounting, right? Where you
Yeah.
have gap and you have a number of like very clearly established standards that companies have been following for a long time. Um, Obviously carbon accounting is just much more nascent than that, but I think where we've really tried to differentiate is by focusing on a product-led experience and saying kind of from day one, we really want this to be software that enables users who wouldn't otherwise have the time or budget to do this well, to really have something that can let them compete effectively and frankly impress their clients, right? So
Right.
we think about software like MailChimp or HubSpot that enables kind of smaller businesses to run, really effective email campaigns or really effective sales organizations, and to kind of punch above their weight by having tools that kind of embed excellence in what they're doing and ultimately increase their capacity, right? Like those tools are teaching as they serve. So as people use them more and more, they're saying, oh, you know what? A great email campaign looks like this, and I can totally replicate that. And here's how it works. We really felt like it was important to build a tool that would help businesses who didn't otherwise have a really obvious solution, whether that was like an in-house resource or a consulting group, or frankly just sort of weren't sophisticated enough to understand what they were being asked for. We really felt like it was important to not only give them software that would enable them to compete with larger, better funded, more sophisticated players, but also to grow that capacity within their businesses, so that whoever is taking on that mantle, whether it's accounting or compliance or someone in marketing, that over time they're actually more and more able to do that. And I think that's all related to this longer term view we have that carbon accounting will ultimately look very much like financial accounting, where it will be software that companies are comfortable using. And I think that focus on usability and self-serve and kind of product-led growth has given us a few differentiators that people really like, right? We have sort of very quick time to value, low total cost of ownership, a very deep feature set that people can get started with on their own. And what's been really cool as the market has evolved, to your point, is that those same features that were really attractive to smaller players are actually really attractive to big players too, right? So like if
Yeah.
you think about those analogies around the number of big corporations that also use MailChimp and also use HubSpot, like people like to have really usable, really fully featured software that they're not paying an arm and a leg for. And so we've been fortunate to see that focus on ease of use and product-led experience, while it served us really well with our initial kind of mid-market customer, has also been really attractive as we've seen more and more enterprise buyers come into this space.
Yeah. So it sounds like the original, kind of ethos was democratizing sustainability action for everybody. And then as your badass product team and, sustainability expertise, internally starts to evolve, you start to understand what your customers really need. Then you're starting to change, see that buyer persona, if you want to call it that, kind of shift a bit. Right. Um,
Yeah.
have you noticed that progression and just the different types of conversations you're having with companies?
Definitely. Definitely. I think when we first got started, the buyer that we were really trying to speak to was one that we had experience looking at while we were still at Walmart. And so they were largely suppliers to customers like Walmart. And that was really where we understood that space pretty well and had a product that really worked for them. And I think part of that was reflecting that for those companies, the most important driver for them was that their client, who's really important to them, was asking them for this data. And so they felt a lot of pressure to kind of get that right, to continue to build relationships with their largest clients, to win new clients. But what's been really interesting over the last couple of quarters is as we've seen the regulatory environment really heat up in the US with California SB 253, with the new SEC
Right.
regulations, we've seen larger and larger companies come into the market looking for solutions, because maybe they're actually the large corporate who's setting the requirements for suppliers. So maybe they wouldn't have felt that pressure earlier on, but now they're coming into scope for either California or federal legislation or excuse me, regulation, and are needing to find a solution that works for them today.
Do you think we're years away from, more of a litigious environment? We have a lot of enterprise organizations reaching out to their suppliers. Their suppliers are responding to them and say, "Hey, we are on it, right? We're going to be putting, this in place. We're going to start measuring, our emissions footprint. And the fact that they have gone and put that in writing, right? Do you see a future in which litigation steps in and they say, hey, now that you've said this, you actually need to do this, or you owe us money?
That's really interesting. I mean, I think there's a difference between corporate requirements for suppliers and regulatory requirements for sort of larger companies. I think for suppliers, I don't think that the outcome will be litigious. I think the sort of the stick in that carrot and stick situation is more sales. So for a large
Right.
corporate, they're more capable of saying, you know what, I'm just going to take my business elsewhere and I'm going to go
Right.
to a different company that I think is, performing better in this regard. I think for larger companies who have regulatory requirements, they're going to face fines, right? Like there's a $500,000 fine associated with the California bill. So there's things like that. In general, I think that the sort of best outcome from a climate perspective of a lot of these laws is really transparency and getting more eyes on this data. And so I almost don't even think that you need um, litigation to make companies feel like this is important. I think that the court of public opinion will do that. And the more that um, the more that these kinds of metrics are available about all companies on a regular basis, um, calculated across the same kind of framework, right? So it's not just like in the sort of voluntary disclosure that we see today, you see a lot of companies sort of choosing what to disclose. They're setting organizational boundaries in a way that feels attractive to them. I think the more that we can get a really consistent set of metrics, consistently reported across a really wide range of organizations, that really opens things up to citizens, to journalists, to investors, to the public at large, just to say, hey, I either like what you're doing or I don't. And I think that sort of court of public opinion will do more than an actual legal court in a lot of cases.
Yeah, definitely. And that's been, the court of public opinion has kind of been one of the main drivers here. But, when I tried to sell an ESG solution a number of years ago, we were really only successful with, these really aspirational, kind of brand facing
Sure.
companies. So it's really nice to kind of be in a spot now where organizations are beholden to these regulatory drivers, right?
Totally agreed. Yeah, for a solution like ours, it's much nicer to be a painkiller versus a vitamin, right? So when we're
Yeah,
addressing a real pain point for a business, it's just much clearer, not just to sell software, but really to have them engage with the process, right? Because putting
right.
together a carbon footprint and really being rigorous about what you're doing, like it's hard. It's hard work. It takes a bunch of time. It's going to be extra work for somebody on your team. And so I think without some force that's kind of making it a business imperative for you, you're probably just not going to be able to put the necessary amount of time into it.
Yeah. I'd like to shift gears a little bit. When I joined Sustain.Life, I was very impressed with how well the organization was ran and uh, how you're doing the little things right as far as communication, transparency. And I'm not sure if you attribute that just to the leaders that you have over there and what you've been able to put in place, or the B Corp certification that I know is so important to you. I'm curious, what's been kind of the main driver there.
Well, thanks, Bobby. That is really nice to hear, and thank you. That's great to hear. I think there's a couple things. One is that for a lot of these folks, we've worked with them for 10 years already. And when we think about the team that we're building, whether it's those folks we've already worked with for 10 years or folks like yourself who are joining us now, um, we're really thinking about building, 10 plus year working relationships together. And
Yeah.
so when it comes to how you talk to people and how you um, empower them and what details they should know, um, really thinking about that as, how do I keep this person engaged and motivated and interested over 10 years? I think it kind of um, changes the cost benefit of like, do I share, bad news now or do I wait or try to hide it? Like, well, if you're building kind
Yeah.
of a 10-year relationship with trust with somebody, then like, of course you're going to tell them the bad news. And also, like, in the case of a 10-year relationship, one piece of bad news doesn't really matter that much. So it's
Right.
not, the risk of sharing that is not so high. So I think that's definitely one piece of it. I think the other thing that we've learned and tried to do with this business for sure is, hire really excellent people who are thoughtful and have good judgment. And when you hire people like that, the more information you can give them, the better they're going to do their job, right? Like
Right.
it's not my, or I think any manager's like desire to micromanage an employee like that. It sucks for everybody. It's just
Yeah.
a horrible experience. And so I think when you do a good job, hiring thoughtful people, and I think particularly working in climate, we find that people are joining for the right reason. They're very motivated by what we're doing. They're very excited about the cause. When you have a group of people like that who are extremely motivated and bought into your mission, um, giving them more information just enables them to do their job better, and frankly makes it a lot easier for me to trust that they're all kind of making the right decisions on a day-to-day basis. So yeah, I'm glad that you can feel that, but it has been really great for us, I think, to have a team, again, as connected to the mission and as motivated by what we're doing as we are.
Yeah. Yeah. It was certainly refreshing. And I know that I get a lot of questions from executive leaders and other founders who are thinking about exploring a B Corp certification. I'm curious, what was that process like?
Oh
And I guess
gosh.
why was that important for you?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh man. So I have wanted to work for a B Corp for so long. It's been just like a
Yeah,
personal dream of mine to work for a B Corp.
that's awesome.
Um, yeah, well, they're so cool. Like it's such a cool
Yeah,
program. And I think too, when you're starting a business, well, I guess to back up, when we started Sustain.Life, I had for a long time wanted to work for a B Corp. And so when we first got started, it was really important to me that we were looking at the B Corp um, as sort of a critical goal for us in our first couple of years of existence. And
yeah,
I think I think it's actually probably easier to get B Corp status if you start it right from the very beginning, because they have a fantastic kind of framework. And look, a lot of it's about the environment, which is obviously really, close to our mission and close to what we're doing. But a lot of it's also about compensation, how you're hiring people. I mean, a lot of it relates to governance and like the records that you're keeping about things. And so actually starting that process right when we founded the business made it a lot easier to put a lot of those policies in place, to have the records that we needed. And they were even helpful, guardrails or guidelines as we were making decisions that, frankly, we didn't have a ton of data about or didn't know very much about. And so things like, what kind of benefits are we going to select? Or like, how do we want to think about working with contractors and how should those contracts be structured? Those were things that I didn't necessarily have a very strong opinion about coming
right.
into it. But I thought that the B Corp standards were just um, a really helpful framework for thinking about those decisions that like I was frankly not an expert in. And so, yeah, we did a ton of work early on, especially as we were making those early kind of foundational decisions that were very aligned to the B Corp standards. And we got our B Corp certification last spring or 2 springs ago. And so proud of it. Like so proud
Yeah,
to have done that. And I think that the changes that we've made or even initial decisions that we made that were based around the B Corp framework have really been good for us. And it's been an ongoing kind of helpful framework to keep looking at, right? So like as we have to make new decisions or we're renewing, policies, et cetera, it's just been an incredibly helpful set of guidelines for us.
Yeah, I find it like such an interesting dynamic, being a lean, mean startup who is in, aggressive growth stage, and also B Corp certified, doing the business the right way, building out the right culture, um, can be somewhat of a complex balance, and you can get kind of caught in growth mode and kind of let that reflect into the way that you communicate with your team, how hard you're pushing everybody. And even some, like yourself, going on maternity leave, I would imagine, honestly, I think back, like, you don't see a ton of founders like really kind of feel comfortable stepping away from the business for a time in order to do that. And I think it's such an important message and kind of role to set, expectation to set, right?
Yeah, I mean, one really cool statistic, which I don't know if you know this, um,
Yeah,
just about half of our team actually have young kids, which is really
yeah,
surprising in a startup environment, right? Like
it
it's very
is.
uncommon to have kids. And actually, and again, you may not know this either, but a lot of those kids identify as special needs. And so we
Right.
have not only, parents of young kids, but also parents who are dealing with kids who have different needs, right? And have different sort of responsibilities at home. And I'm really proud of that. Like, I think it's
Yeah,
fantastic that we can have a space where you can be really engaged and motivated with work, but also have kind of the space to make your work for your life, and be able to balance those two things. And to your point on taking maternity leave, you know, I think it would set a really bad example
yeah,
if I was sort of like advocating for young parents on the team, and then like wasn't taking maternity leave myself. I'm also really lucky, and this comes back again to having co-founders that I've worked with for 10 years. It was very easy for Mike, one of my co-founders, to step in as interim CEO when I was on maternity leave. And actually, when we were, just starting the business, it was a conversation we had really early on when we decided that I would be the CEO, where I said, look, I'm thinking about having a kid. How are we gonna think about that? That was a conversation we had early on.
yeah,
And Mike, who has 4 kids, was always like incredibly supportive and just like, yeah, whenever you go out, I'll be interim CEO. It'll be fine. And it was completely fine. He and I talk really frequently. Um, I mean, not frequently enough to make it like not a maternity leave, but
right,
you know, the way that you would talk frequently with someone you've known for 10 years. And that just made the whole thing really, I won't say like really easy, because having a baby is not all that easy, but
right, right.
but made it a very manageable process. And hopefully can enable us to keep, making it a great place um for parents to work, and not just parents, but like, anyone who wants work that they really care about, and then also wants to be able to, live their life and have other priorities. And we always know that those things happen, and ideally, and again, this comes back to thinking about decade or multi-decade relationships with somebody. you know you want to treat people the right way in those major life events. And if you're saying, hey, we're probably going to work together for at least 10 years, you know what? If
Yeah,
you're 25 when we meet, like, chances are you're going to have a kid, or you're going to have somebody in your family die, or you're going to have
yeah,
a serious health thing. And that's, all stuff that we want to support. Because otherwise, how do you have a multi-year or multi-decade relationship with someone?
yeah. I love it. Annalee, I have one more question for you. Thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Yeah,
I
of
know you're
course.
super busy. How can we all be better?
It's a great question, Bobby. And I'm going to give you like a pretty easy answer, I guess, but one that's really hard to implement sometimes, um, which I think is just about assuming good intentions. And I think that can be really hard in some cases. But I think everyone typically wakes up in the morning and shows up to work, or shows up to a social engagement, or what have you, um, intending to do a great job and be their best self, and show up the right way in the world. And that's something I think it's important to always remind yourself of, particularly when things are difficult, or you're negotiating something, or what have you. I think and I think we're lucky in working in the climate space that I think people really do have, the best of intentions. And if you can approach every interaction that way, um, it's less stressful for everybody involved.
Thank you for tuning into today's episode of the Be Better podcast. I hope you found our conversation with Annalee Bloomfield as inspiring and insightful as I did. Annalee's journey and the mission of Sustain.Life remind us that with passion, commitment, and innovative thinking, we can tackle even the most daunting challenges like climate change. And as we wrap up, remember that each of us has a role to play in creating a more sustainable future, whether it's the choices that we make in our daily lives, the businesses that we support, or the initiatives that we champion. Our collective efforts can drive meaningful change. Let's let Annalee's story be a testament to the power of purpose-driven work and the impact we can have when we align our skills with our passions. Stay motivated, stay curious, and most importantly, stay committed to being better every day. Thank you for listening. And if you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with others who might be inspired by our conversation. Until next time, keep striving to be better.